debate, the honourable member Central Okanagan Similkameen Nicola.
Madam Speaker, and it's always a pleasure and an honour to rise on behalf of the good people of Central Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola, and I'm very proud to be sharing this time with the previous member. Madam Speaker, the Finance Committee has a very important job. In fact, it's rare because in our standing orders it actually says that the Finance Committee must travel and hear widely from Canadians as it does its deliberations. But, Madam Speaker, as we've heard from the leader of the Conservative of Canada's Common Sense Conservatives, Canada does have a problem. We have a gatekeeper economy, Madam Speaker. And a gatekeeper economy means, Madam Speaker, that there are many people that are seeking prosperity, seeking opportunity, but cannot do so because of the various gatekeepers that are closing in. And, Madam Speaker, as a member of the Finance Committee, a previous member of the Finance Committee, I should say, I took great pride in the effort to try to hear testimony when we travel to sometimes remote locations, Madam Speaker. But one of the key problems we do have is that for the average citizen, let's call them, John Smith or Jane Doe, for the average individual, Madam Speaker, they don't have a lobbyist here in Ottawa. And oftentimes, it's actually lobbyists that are the ones that are coming to the Finance Committee. And the number one recommendation they are always making, Madam Speaker, is to spend more money. Now, when we talk about the costly coalition of an NDP-Liberal, sometimes supported by the Bloc, but mainly the NDP-Liberal government, Madam Speaker, it's because there is never a dollar that they could not find something to spend on. In fact, Madam Speaker, let's go harken back to the first majority that this government had. The Treasury Board president at the time said, we're going to do a spending review. And, Madam Speaker, the spending review that they did came back that actually found that they needed to spend more money. That's the kind of situation where we have, Madam Speaker, no leadership, no priority except to spend others' money. In fact, Madam Speaker, when I speak about this issue, often I refer that Ottawa, in terms of the government, has a spending problem. It doesn't have a revenue problem. Yet there isn't a tax that this government won't look to increase. Every April 1st, we see a hodgepodge of different taxes, starting with the carbon tax. And, Madam Speaker, it doesn't matter what province you are from, the exception of Quebec, Madam Speaker. Every April 1st, we see, again, an NDP government, or NDP-Liberal government raising the carbon tax. In fact, if you go to the BC NDP government's own budget documents, on page 75, they actually say the federal government is responsible for us having to raise our carbon tax. Now, Madam Speaker, I want to just take a quick moment to point out that the members for Foothills has actually asked the government about carbon tax 1 and carbon tax 2. Yes, there is a series of regulations that have ended up, and of course they've been fully costed by both the government and the Parliamentary Budget Office. But the government's own analysis, Madam Speaker, is each one respectively combined is a tax on the economy of up to, if not higher than, $40 billion per year. Let's be mindful that the leader of the NDP has always advocated for more taxes to come to Ottawa. He's talked about not supporting carbon taxes, but we shall see, Madam Speaker, because he also talked about not supporting this Liberal Prime Minister anymore. In fact, he famously now tore up, I'm tearing up the agreement, Madam Speaker, for confidence and supply. And he said that the Prime Minister shouldn't be Prime Minister. And yet, Madam Speaker, he comes to this place today, and what did the NDP leader and his caucus do? They supported this government. So, Madam Speaker, it would be really interesting to see what happens April 1st of next year, where we have things like the carbon tax set to increase. We have things like excise tax on alcohol, Madam Speaker. We'll see what happens at that particular juncture. But, Madam Speaker, I'm going to go back to the gatekeeping economy and the lobbyists and whatnot. Madam Speaker, they always come and they present something. When I speak to my constituents, they are talking in terms of that they're barely able to keep on with what they have, whether that be affording nutritious food. Sylvain Charlebois, the food professor at Dalhousie, has said that people are making the very difficult choice between nutritious food and the cost, and they're more siding with the cost. We should be concerned, Madam Speaker. We should be concerned that many of our constituents are going to food banks because they cannot afford to pay their carbon tax, their income tax, Madam Speaker, all the taxes that this government continues to raise. So, Madam Speaker, we also, and who speaks for those people, Madam Speaker? They don't have a lobbyist. We are supposed to speak for them. We are the ones who are ultimately responsible for either giving the government supply or denying it. So again, we had a confidence vote today where we saw both the Bloc and the NDP side with the Liberal government. Now, Madam Speaker, I believe that we need to be looking more to our constituents rather than the recommendations of lobbyists that show up at the Finance Committee and others. So, Madam Speaker, we also need to consider that our average, again, John Smith or Jane Doe, especially if they're younger, are having critical shortages of housing. Now, this Liberal government has said every single fall economics update and every budget, oh, this is the big thing and we're going to address that. Madam Speaker, they have not. They have not addressed things like chronic homelessness. They have not addressed the fact that young people cannot get into the market even when they save and scrimp to get there, Madam Speaker. They keep talking about all the different programs that they offer and how that's going to alleviate the system. But again, Madam Speaker, going back to that gatekeeper economy, we have it where many municipalities, particularly in those large urban centers, yes, I'm talking about the census metropolitan areas, where people, city councillors, are choosing not to build housing in sufficient quantities. And Madam Speaker, this is caused where, again, if you have a massive demand for housing, which has only gone up and due to the policies of this government, Madam Speaker, if we continue to allow gatekeepers, such as municipal councils, to basically stop the investment of new housing, in BC, in the past year, we've seen housing starts drop by 34%. Madam Speaker, that is going to create an affordability challenge, a crisis again. This government and politicians that support it constantly talk about the housing crisis, and yet there's very little discussion about putting pressure on municipalities. In fact, Madam Speaker, the government's own so-called housing accelerator, I called it a slush fund for municipalities. They are essentially allowing municipalities, writing them checks for not increasing housing stock. Even in Kelowna, which a part of my riding is in Kelowna, if you actually read through the Housing Accelerator plan, Madam Speaker, it actually talks about that they can actually invest the dollars that they're given from it in things like bike lanes and bridges and sewers. There's no onus on the city of Kelowna to help build a single house. There's not an actual commitment for that. So, Madam Speaker, this is the problem. We have a government that fails to acknowledge that municipal councils are those gatekeepers, instead of putting up a set of incentives that actually reward those who are building and punishing those that are not. They've essentially written out blank checks to these municipalities, Madam Speaker. And you know what? They also have been picking winners and choosers. I know the city of West Kelowna, Summerland, the District of Summerland, District of Peachland, all applied for the same funding. Madam Speaker, didn't get anywhere with this government. So again, this scattershot approach, Madam Speaker, is not working. And again, it's those young people that I want to focus on, because all of us here love this country. I really believe that we do. But the problem is if we continue to deliver the same kind of results, Madam Speaker, those young people are going to feel alienated, and they're going to either opt out, not vote, or they're going to vote for very extreme choices. Now, the member for Carleton, Madam Speaker, as I've said before, has been adamant that he and our party will build the homes. So, Madam Speaker, on this concurrence debate, we need to discuss more about, again, axing the tax. We need to build more homes. I wish I could get to fix the budget and stopping the crime, Madam Speaker, but I'm running out of time. Thank you. Looking forward to questions in this chamber.
And comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Government House Leader.
So thank you, Madam Speaker. And sadly, we see the Conservative Party continues to want to play the game of filibustering and at a significant expense. The real people that the Conservative Party is actually penalizing by this behavior is actually Canadians. Canadians are feeling the impact of a Conservative opposition party that continues to feel entitled to thrive for their thirst for power and filibustering government legislation to the degree they won't even allow it to go to committee. Does the member not recognize that the official opposition does have a role to play, that it also assists and can help Canadians?
The member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola.
Speaker, because we do not agree with this government's agenda, that's called a democracy where people can disagree. And I would also just disagree with the whole statement that the government thinks that it has the right issues today. Madam Speaker, my constituents are talking about the unaffordability of just being able to pay their bills, Madam Speaker. They want to see us axe the tax. They also want to see us talk about housing. Madam Speaker, it's politicians that say there's a crisis and then they do nothing about it. In fact, they talk about other things. Madam Speaker, the common sense Conservatives, we are the party that will axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget and stop the crime. Madam Speaker, those are the priorities of my constituents.
The Honourable Member for Joliette. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech, and he's a colleague that I have the pleasure of working together with on the Finance Committee and have for some months now. At the beginning of his speech, he said that the government was spendthrift. And one of the things the government spends the most on is supporting the fossil fuel industries like oil and natural gas. For example, there's the Trans Mountain pipeline that costs $34 billion. And there's also the carbon capture and nuclear plants in the oil sands that's used there. So $83 billion plus $23 billion. So does my colleague like me believe that that spending should be cut back? The Honourable Member for Central Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola. Madam Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for his question from the Bloc. In politics, I give my support where the government taxes the correct amount.
For example, this member at Finance Committee raised legitimate questions about the so-called luxury tax, a tax on workers that actually we had industry come in and say this will harm the industry and we will push business to the United States and to other places. So that's a policy that I 100% agree with my Bloc Québécois member. Madam Speaker, I would also suggest that he may want to take a look at l'énergie de West.
Western energy, particularly natural gas.
Home province of British Columbia, Madam Speaker. We could be doing good things on the environment and the economy. We can be helping displace dirty coal right across the whole country, across the whole world, Madam Speaker. These are some of the things we should have discussions about, and I hope that we will with this gentleman and his party in the future.
We have time for a brief question. The Honourable Member for Vancouver Kingsway.
Madam Speaker, my honourable colleague spoke about the #1 issue being affordability for his constituents. I can tell you that's the same issue that I've heard in my riding of Vancouver Kingsway. We come from the same province. Now, the NDP has addressed that in a number of ways, and one of the ways we did that was by bringing in dental care for 9 million people so that the thousands of dollars that someone would have to pay on dental care out of their pocket would no longer be the case for them. We also brought in pharmacare, and we know with diabetes medication, I've talked to many, many people who have to spend thousands of dollars every year on diabetes medications and devices. Can he explain to us, if he's truly concerned about affordability, why he and his party voted against those two measures, which take thousands of dollars of expenses off some of the most low-income Canadians in Canada, which would obviously ease their affordability issues? Why did he oppose that?
Was far from a brief question. The honourable member for South Okanagan, Central Okanagan, Similkameen Nicola, a brief answer, please.
Okay, I'll be very quick. I'll give the member a practical example. My understanding is in the Similkameen and in Penticton proper, there has not been any sign-ups for a dentist. Maybe there has been one now, Madam Speaker. But for the NDP to be touting that this program is widely available and accessible to people, Madam Speaker, I've had people in Kelowna that have told me that they've tried to go to a different dentist, but the new dentist requires a numbers of x-rays that cost hundreds of dollars, Madam Speaker, and they cannot afford that. So, Madam Speaker, this member may believe his own rhetoric, but when you actually talk to the people that are trying to access the so-called dental program, they can't. Madam Speaker, it is smoke and mirrors, and many people have phoned me specifically because they know I'm a conservative and they want that feedback heard on the House of Commons floor.
I don't think that was a brief answer either, but it's okay. I think it was about the same amount of timing.